Journalism is ever evolving. Since the dawn of the storyteller, people have retold stories and shared information. Journalism came from a need to inform, so it only ever made sense for the medium to evolve over time. Video game journalism is one aspect of the evolution of journalism as a whole. Every medium from movies to sports is covered in some way by the news, but not every medium gets the same kind of coverage. Journalists are usually regarded as watchdogs, looking out for the general population by reporting the truth. When it comes to video games journalism, that was no different. But what started this scene? And how did all that change nearly overnight? If we're going to go to the start, we have to go all the way back. Before the World Wide Web, news was covered largely physically. Newspapers, magazines, radio, your local television station. Computers back then didn't have many of the features we're used to in the now. To help us understand what things were like back then, I talked to a special professor at Muskegon University. Allow me to introduce...
Hi there. I am Kekoa Kaluhio-Kalani. I teach in the English department here at Muskegon University. I've been here since 2006, and I have a course release to participate in activities associated with the Impact Office.
Video games were a niche hobby back then, reserved for computer nerds in the 80s and 90s or avid arcade fanatics. And maybe the spoiled kid down the block who had their own console. There wasn't much coverage of the scene outside of technological developments, and maybe the occasional advertisement. But going back to the 70s, there's one publication that really started the trend. Coin Industry Playmeter was a gaming magazine all about the latest and greatest in arcade gaming. Kicking off in 1974, Playmeter covered new games, news, and innovations in arcade gaming. Playmeter had a head start in the scene and inspired many publications to pick up a pencil and drive into the niche. The golden age of video games started in 1978, 4 years after Playmeter's beginning. The game Space Invaders hit the shelves and created a boom in popularity. In North America, Arcade Alley hit the magazine shelves in 1979, covering console gaming.
So of course, at the time, you're a kid, you want to play games, which is what I did often. And that also coincided with my growing love of literacy and magazines and access to journalism. And so of course, when you're a kid, you want to know what the good games are. And also, so you access, back in my day, of course, it was magazines. And that's how you would keep in touch with the development of, if you want to call it the art and the business and the discipline.
The first consumer-oriented magazine dedicated solely to video games was Computer and Video Games, a UK-based magazine publication that started in 1981. It was the first British video game magazine as well. Much like Arcade Alley and Playmeter, Computer and Video Games kicked off a growing trend that would soon run into hot water. In 1983, a drought in new video games created the Great Video Game Crash. It was a large-scale recession, often attributed to market saturation and a lack of new development in games and consoles. Many publications didn't survive the crash, but the founders, Playmeter, Arcade Alley, and Computer and Video Games, survived it. Their survival was important not just to the journalism scene, but to the consumers and the culture. Magazines have fallen out of fashion in the modern day. Many fell out of circulation or simply became unpopular. You can find backups on archive sites, and maybe a few original copies of Playmeter at a local library. But for the most part, gaming has moved on from the one thing that helped get its start. You had to adapt or assimilate, and if you didn't, you'd be left behind in the dust. When the internet evolved past rotary and limitations, it brought a giant wave of people into the tech scene. People were being exposed to each other in ways that hadn't been experienced. Online gaming connected players from around the world to each other, both on the computer and on console. Naturally, games journalism had to evolve with it. Games journalism had largely been considered as lifestyle journalism, the likes of which you see covering new avenues of comfort in daily life, or maybe the latest and greatest items hitting the shelves and why. Even during this era, meta-journalistic discourse largely kept games journalism divided from the truly professional realm of total news coverage, like covering important public issues and important topics that go beyond soft news and feature stories. Games journalism took to the internet and found its new home there, with early publications adapting to the style of blogging, forum posting, and hosting, as well as reviews and more. Through the internet, journalism could reach a larger group than what could be found with magazines, though that wouldn't stop the practice of physical media.
So then once internet comes around, because a lot of the early adopters were sort of computer geeky guys already, or people anyway, it felt the term Wild West, it just felt so unstructured and just, it felt really crazy in a way of how your ability to sort of, get reviews that you trusted to begin with and just know what was out there. It felt very, very janky. I just remember feeling a little both kind of giddy but also depressed.
Notably, games journalism worked with distributors and even gaming companies to cover everything they could, from big events to new releases. It was not hard to see the impact they had on connecting people, both new gamers and old, with video games. By this point, video games had grown from being a niche hobby to something that was being widely adopted in many homes. The public largely viewed home video games as a harmless, fun activity for the kids or maybe dad after he got home from work. But soon, games journalism would have to deal with an old issue that once only affected one side of the industry. This is Jack Thompson. He's an activist and previously was an attorney in law. You might not know him, but if you did, you'd know him as the anti-video game lawyer. A Cleveland native, Thompson was a big activist working against the creation, sale, and distribution of violent video games. He kicked more than a few hornets' nests back in the day, and he made himself another controversial figure straight out of the Green Plains of Ohio. Just like this guy. Controversy with video games wasn't rare. Many games, like the 1975 Death Race, which was the first ever video game to get pulled straight off the shelves for its pixelated depiction of car violence, and the original Mortal Kombat, drew all manner of controversy back in the day. For games journalists, they were gamers first, press second. In cases of controversy, they stayed neutral in their coverage. For those that didn't, their opinions wouldn't attract much negative attention, especially given how before the web era, it was very difficult to acquire more than one publication's issue given how magazine distribution worked and still works. Going back to Thompson though, he ended up filing the first in a large swath of anti-video game lawsuits in 1997, claiming video game violence inspired the Heath High School shooting of the same year. The shooters played old retro FPSs like Quake, Wolfenstein, and Doom. Thompson's activism was warranted, though his attempts throughout history to fight video games, and largely video game developers, has led to him becoming an internet laughingstock. Many in the business consider him a huckster, moral scold, and idiot. And even early video game journalists weren't afraid to keep their opinions contained. When the web era came to be, Thompson's criticisms of the video game industry and the way games journalism helped in the distribution of violent games carried over like a bad omen. If a game causes controversy, then that reflects on those who helped distribute the game. If a game like, say, Call of Duty. If a violent attack were to happen and the suspect talked about how Call of Duty influenced them, then the public will begin to believe that the game turns people into violent gunmen. For games journalists who covered Call of Duty, they receive a percentage of that blame because they reviewed, covered, and helped distribute this game to gamers. This early reaction to Thompson created a split. This split isolated many games journalism outlets with gamers, making their popularity stagnate as now games journalism was tying to the hip with the public perspective of gamers, TM. For the rest of the web era, games journalism would not branch out too far, and many publications would stick to neutral, unbiased reporting and reviewing. They still had lots of good publicity through E3 conventions and collaboration with gaming companies, but this isolation wouldn't end well in the future.
Literally on video games to do this. Dawson College last year, Montreal, the shooter, the killer, trained on a game called Super Columbine Massacre.
Thompson cooled down around 2013. He even did an interview with Kotaku where he admitted that some of his late jabs at the gaming industry was trolling, and how his stance on video games softened heavily over the years. While this was a true positive development, his attacks against the game industry introduced a glaring issue with games journalism as a whole. Games journalists were vulnerable to online attacks. Whether it be genuine criticism or simply hate being thrown their way, they folded. They lost their professionalism. Jack Thompson was the catalyst for what would kick off the modern era of games journalism. Man, they really cannot act normal with Jack. The modern era of games journalism started in the ripe old year of 2014. Yeah, that feels like a millennia ago, right? What? That can't be right. Anyway, games journalism didn't exactly get to the start it wanted in the modern era. As the business turned to adopting a more professional culture and working to become more mainstream after the events of the web era, gamers began to notice a shift. With the web reaching such a high point, video games were influencing culture in all kinds of ways, both good and bad. With this came all manners of controversy and a radical reaction to modern change. Gamergate. Oh god, not this thing. It's hard to describe exactly what Gamergate was, but in a simple explanation, it was a misogynistic hate campaign towards progressive figures in the gaming industry, catalyzed by the belief that progressive ideas and feminism was killing video games. Started on the now supposedly deceased forum site 4chan, which many would consider the root of all evil, it all began with one simple post. August 2014. A post entry called the Zoe Post was put on 4chan by Zoe Quinn's ex-boyfriend, Eran Jani. Quinn was a video game developer, programmer, and writer, and the ex insinuated that Quinn received a good review on her latest game, Depression Quest, because of a sexual relationship with a games journalist. 4chan sent hateful messages, harassed Quinn online, and even doxed her and threatened to sexually assault her. This hate extended to other prominent feminist figures in the gaming industry, like Anita Sarkeesian and Brianna Wu. This moment was defining for the video games industry at large because it revealed a large problem of misogyny and hate in the sphere of video games that was unfortunately being stimulated through the portrayal of men and women in video games.
So when something like Gamergate comes around and it just becomes a sort of exhausting reminder of the steep pushback that sometimes comes amongst a certain segment, and we also know that the nature of the internet can amplify very small voices. Like one small angry person can create ripples of damage and unhappiness and fear because of the anonymity, because of the ability to just send one message that hits everyone. And so to me, it was sort of a depressing reminder that technology is a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. It allows people to celebrate their uniqueness, but then it also allows a very vocal minority to create a lot of fear and unhappiness, and that's what I recall.
Games journalists went to the defense of those at the end of the Gamergate hate campaign. Articles defending figures like Sarkeesian and Quinn were targeted due to their attacks on gamers and gamer culture. Publications that spoke out against the campaign were targeted ferociously. Coordinated campaigns went after sponsors and advertisers who uplifted games journalists. In other not-so-coordinated campaigns, games journalists were ridiculed as social justice warriors and flamed online for their radical political bias. It tore apart the organized structures that the gaming journalism scene had spent so much time building up. Combined with other controversies like the machinima scandal and a few bad articles from IGN and other mainstream publications, gaming journalism had hit a low so deep it never recovered from it. All of this because some guy was mad that his ex-girlfriend's game got a good review score. I mean, come on! In the modern day, games journalists have struggled to find good ground in this scene. Nowadays, when you open YouTube and search games journalists, you'll just find endless videos mirroring the same ones from the Gamergate years. Videos talking about the end of games journalism, how the scene is a nightmare, how it's all nothing but grifting and lies. The reality is that gaming journalism has been cursed. When popular influencers are angry with you, it doesn't take much of an excuse to send a hate mob your way. Journalists can't compete with big YouTubers and streamers. Nowadays, many journalists have adopted to the same style of content as many other popular content creators, a style of influencer content that betrays the professionalism of mainstream journalism. Publications like IGN still exist, and they try their best to maintain relevance with reviews of new games, helpful articles, and more. But in some cases, like the Philip Mewson situation, one pitfall is enough to send their reputation right back down to post-Gamergate levels. People like Philip, those who copy and paste their way to success both inside and outside the scene, unfortunately populate the internet widely. The public perspective of video games journalism couldn't be lower. The watchdogs of the industry had been replaced by figures with ill intent. Information was replaced with influence, and now misinformation plagues the video game scene worse than ever. We need real watchdogs back, now more than ever.